Hello, class. There are many topics. Some are very controversial in the African American community. Many of them will be analyzed and discussed in this undergraduate course concerning the African Americans in the 20th century. Today, we shall discuss slave reparations. And I would like to begin with an essential question. Cornel West, the African American public intellectual, says there are two major problems in the African American community. One, too much poverty. Two, too little self love. And Chuck Collins, author, goes on to say that the median wealth for a white household in America is about $147,000, which is 41 times more than the median household wealth for the African American community, which is about $3,600. The question is, what can be done and how to reduce the wealth gap between African Americans and whites? Is slave reparations the answer? So let's begin with a short overview of slavery in the United States. Slavery in the United States was the legal institution of human chattel slavery, comprising of the enslavement of Africans and African Americans that existed in the United States of America from its founding in 1776 until the passage of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution in 1865. Slavery was established throughout the European colonization of the Americas. From early colonial days, it was practiced in British colonies, including the 13 colonies which formed the United States. Under the law, an enslaved person was treated as property and could be bought or sold or given away or bequeathed to someone upon death of the slaveholder for given in marriage as a gift, and so on. And slavery lasted in about half of the United States until about 1865 as this economic system. Slavery was largely replaced by sharecropping and contract leasing. So why is slave reparations a hot button issue? Many individuals on either side of the color line attribute the wealth gap to the institution of slavery. In recent days, there has been a renewed call for slave reparation, and it is a very sticky, tricky issue. There is no consensus on how these reparations, which are focused primarily on slave descendants, how that will work. This is not a new issue. In fact, it dates all the way back to 1865, when former slaves were promised 40 acres and a mule. That 40 acres, that mule would have given them land to work and the means to be self-sufficient. Of course, it did not happen. Recently, Democratic legislators, lawmakers have called for a vote on the bill to study slave reparations, and also a handful of cities and states have made progress in studying slave reparations. In 2020, it was a hot button topic on the campaign trail with Democratic nominee Joe Biden, who said that he supported a study to determine reparations as a mean to abolishing racism in this country. And also his running mate from California, Senator Kamala Harris, has co-sponsored a bill that would study the effects of slavery and recommend ideas for the abolishment of racism and to speed up slave reparations. So naturally, the hotly contested aspects of slave reparations would be placing a cash value on 100 years of forced servitude and the source of the compensations and who would receive them. Cost projections range from about 17 billion to almost 97 trillion. The math is tricky. Anthropologist and author Jason Hickel notes in his 2018 book, The Divide, Global Inequity from Conquest to Free Markets, it is estimated that the United States has benefited from over 223 million hours of forced labor from 1619 to the abolition of slavery in 1865. And factoring in the minimum wage with a modest rate of interest, that is worth about $97 trillion. Thomas Kramer of the University of Connecticut, the associate professor, says slave reparations would cost about 19 trillion. He takes the slave population, multiplies it by work hours, multiplied by wages, and a 3% compounded interest. This was 2018 numbers. Kramer's projections are not based on the colonial period or the period following emancipation. So let's say, for the sake of argument, if you were to give each slave descendant $20,000, what would that accomplish? And also, where does the money come from? Generally, advocates for reparations say there are three different sources of this money. Number one, federal and state governments, which enshrined, supported, and protected the institution of slavery. Two, private businesses that benefited from slavery. And three, rich families that owe a great portion of their wealth to the institution of slavery. There are many wealthy families in the South that once owned a lot of slaves, and you can trace their wealth all the way back to the ancestors who had the free labor of slaves. You can imagine there will be a tremendous amount of pushback if families are informed that they are being sued for reparations because they benefited from slavery. Author Alan D. Cooper asserts that the association with a debt has complicated the ability to win legal cases because you cannot prove damages. He says that it should be attacked from the position of genocide. So we'll see where that goes. Reparations could mean more than just a cash payout, and there are options, and here are some of those proposals. An option could be a social security program for land resources. It could mean a mix of cash and programs to target or help African American people. Direct benefits could include cash payments and subsidized home mortgages. The United States has followed these procedures following the Second World War to help families kind of get on their feet. Author Chuck Collins asserts that another options could be free tuition and financial support at universities and colleges for first-generation African-American college students. Collins adds that reparation funds could also be used to provide one-time endowments to start a museum and also historical exhibits on slavery. So the city of Asheville, North Carolina, and other places like California have taken action to look deeper into slave reparations and how to make amends for America's original sin. Of course, there are arguments against reparations. Opponents argue that all the slaves are dead, and no white person today living owns slaves, and not all the immigrants who came from European nations benefited from slavery. Not all African Americans are descendants of slavery. And because of slavery, it's very difficult to determine that your ancestors were slaves. Some folks see it as an insult to African Americans today to say, here's some cash. So why are slave reparations a hot button topic now? A century has passed since the end of the war between the states. This movement really caught steam in the 1980s and 1990s with literature, legislation being presented to look into reparations. Also, groups have emerged, such as Black Lives Matter, that is waving the banner for slave reparations. Since 2002, there have been lawsuits against major companies, including railroads, insurance companies, that have been said to have benefited from slave labor. So what are the prospects of reparations moving forward? Slave reparations face a very steep uphill battle. The idea is not popular with the American public. According to Washington Post and ABC News, in 2020 found that 63% of Americans do not think that the U.S. should pay reparations to the descendants of slaves. About 82% of Americans support reparations. About 75% of white America do not. So whatever your thoughts on the issue, the fact remains that there is an enormous wealth gap between whites and African Americans, and that slavery helped create that enormous gap. People say slavery was so long ago, my family didn't own slaves. But I think the key to understanding that there was unpaid labor by millions, and the legacy of slavery, Jim Crow, discrimination in mortgage lending, and race-based system of mass incarceration created uncompensated wealth for individuals, and white society, immigrants with European heritage directly and indirectly benefited from this system of white supremacy. Finally, there is no doubt that the past is very much in the present. The notion of slave reparations are not going away. Everyone has an opinion. It would be very interesting to me to hear your thoughts on slave reparations. Thank you very much for watching my video. I look forward to your feedback. Thank you.